2:03 here, so I think we're probably at a point where we can get things started. I think there were a few more people who may have been registered, but if they will be joining us, they can sort of filter in over the next few minutes. I'll just be kind of setting the stage so they won't miss anything significant. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Nick Maturo. I'm a research coordinator at ELAN. I work on a project called Quebec Relations, which is, as you can see from our screen, Quebec Relations is hosting this webinar series. So I would like to thank all of you for joining us here today. A special note of thanks to any of you who were originally registered for the first date for this session, which was last Thursday, and who were gracious enough to change your date to accommodate us. That's really appreciated, and we're happy that you can make it today. So just a few notes before we get started. I do ask that you keep your video off and your microphones muted during the session, just to help to minimize distractions for your fellow participants. Also, the lack of video I find sort of helps to stabilize the Zoom connection, make sure there's no issues with choppy audio or anything like that. If for some reason the Zoom session is interrupted, which may happen, that sometimes happens, not likely, but in the event that it does, I'll send you a new link to a Zoom call ASAP over email. So just be on the lookout for that if the worst should happen. And a final note, this session will be recorded for archival purposes. We won't be sharing any part of the recording that contains the faces, voices, written words, or names of our participants unless we've obtained their written consent. And before we begin, I just want to say a quick note of welcome to two members of the ELAN team who are joining us here today. First is Guy Rogers, our Executive Director and the Project Manager of Quebec Relations. Hi, Guy, I can see your face now. So Guy will be saying a few words about Quebec Relations later, just to provide you a bit of context about the work we're doing and a bit of background on the project. Also joining us today is Swati Khanna, ELAN's program manager. Swati has graciously accepted to once again help us moderate the question period at the end of the session. So thank you as always, Swati. So this is the third in a series of webinars through Quebec Relations, or more specifically, it's the second of this third in the series, as we had our first live streaming webinar last Thursday. So broadly put, Quebec Relations is a project that's all about helping arts and culture organizations access new funding through the provincial government. And since quarantine began, we've sort of shifted the work we've been doing to try to make the most of Zoom, these kind of remote sessions, in order to be able to offer more presentations and expand the kind of support that we are able to provide during COVID-19. So each month we're presenting one or two sessions on a range of topics that generally relate to funding for arts organizations. This one is sort of a bit of an extension on that, as today we're providing an introduction to live streaming for artists and organizations, as well as an overview of some of the different approaches to how you can monetize those streams. As always, we really do welcome your feedback on this and any of our other sessions. We're doing this to try to be as responsive to the community's needs as possible, provide you with the kind of support that it's actually useful to you. So if you have any feedback that you'd like to offer, I'm certainly more than happy to hear it. Just to provide you with a bit of an outline of how we're going to proceed before getting to the heart of the matter. First, as I mentioned, Guy is going to provide us a bit of a background on Quebec Relations. Some of you may already be somewhat familiar with the project. But Guy will bring us all up to speed and give you a bit of context. Then I'll start by going over some of the basics behind live streaming. So some of the things you'll want to keep in mind before you get started, how you can approach it based on your artistic discipline, some of the most significant platforms that you can choose from, and what to consider when you're making your choice of platforms. So from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the more technical considerations, sort of give the broad outlines of some of the basic equipment that you'll need in order to ensure a reasonably high quality stream. At that point, I'm going to turn my attention to, I think the question on a lot of people's minds, how you can actually monetize your streams. And I'll suggest a few different approaches that could help you do that. I'm also going to highlight 2 funding programs that can provide some specific resources for presenting your work online. And I'll finish my presentation with sort of a brief discussion of how Quebec Relations can help you apply for some of that new funding now, but also some other grants that could be useful beyond just live streaming. And then with the time remaining, we'll close off with a brief question period. How this is going to work, usually if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type those into the chat window, and Swati will be keeping track of those for the end of the presentation. Since we're sort of a smaller group today, at the end, once we've moved through all the questions in the chat window, we may open things up and just have you sort of unmute your microphone if you should have any questions at that point. So we do have a lot to cover. I'll try to move through things at a decent pace, but just let me know in the chat window if I'm moving too quickly for you. I'll also note that this might seem like a lot of information, particularly if this is all new to you, but I will be sharing the slides with everyone at the end of the session, so don't feel like you have to retain everything or take exhaustive notes on the spot. The slides will also include links with more detail. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that come up afterwards once you've had a chance to look through that. I also want to note that I'm going to try to provide a range of information that will allow you to engage with streaming at the level that makes sense for you. So whether that's broadcasting with your phone and the headphones with a microphone built in that you have, or something more complicated, really what matters most is that you feel comfortable enough to pick an approach that just lets you focus on your art and not get too bogged down with the technical side of things. So with that said, I will hand things over to Guy to give us a bit of background on Quebec Relations.
Thanks, Nick. Hello, everybody. I see a number of familiar faces here and a few people that I don't recognize. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a background on where this Quebec Relations project came from, but more importantly, how it can be of value to you. About 4 years ago, the Couillard government created a Secretariat for Relations with English-speaking Quebecers, which is something the community had been asking for many years. And when the head of the Secretariat was first installed, he came to see me to ask if there were any particular problems for artists to obtain funding from Quebec. And of course, there have been in the past, and there continue to be in the present. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting access to information. Sometimes people would prefer to have that information in English, which is rarely the case. Sometimes there are perceived barriers because the process is not clearly understood, and sometimes there are real barriers. So the Secretariat gave Elan funding for a 2.5-year project called Quebec Relations that Nick is working on full-time. And he began by going through all of the funding sources within Quebec. So starting with the regular suspects, CALQ, SODEC, moving on to the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Education, but then proceeding to look through regional development, tourism, employability, etc. And he came up with about 130 one-pagers outlining the available funds, how to access them, dates that were applicable, amounts were applicable, and he translated all of those into English. So that was the first phase of the project. We have the resources to help people apply for funding. Now, I just have to add as a proviso that this project was designed for companies. It was designed to provide extra resources for incorporated for-profit or not-for-profit companies. We are extending those rules where we can. The current project will expire March 31st of next year, and we're hoping to extend it for another 3 years and expand the mandate to include individual artists, because there's a lot of you and your needs are certainly important. For the time being, there's a limit to how much we can do for individual artists, but as well as helping people apply for funding after steering them towards the funding, we're also monitoring results to make sure that there are no systemic barriers involved in actually getting the funding once a decent application has been submitted. Now, when we started doing this work 2 years ago, of course, we had no anticipation of COVID-19, which has changed everything. Within Elan, we had a major art education project that some of you on this call are involved in, and with the shutting of the schools, we've had to think very hard about how to shift that material online, how to make it available. We have another project called Arts to You that was about connecting artists and audiences. And again, because of what's happening with COVID-19, artists are not producing or presenting the way they were. So we've expanded the mandate of that project to help develop techniques to be able to present online. So Nick has presented this information specifically about monetizing online activities. Very important, very interesting, but I just want to underline that this project is much broader than that. It involves every kind of funding from Quebec. So if you have not been through Nick's list, if you had not looked at the funding sources, he's happy to talk to you. I'm happy to talk to you. Under certain conditions, which are not tremendously restringent, we can provide support to help you write that application, or at least to read your applications. And then we want to know that you've applied so that we can monitor the results. So that is the Quebec Relations project. We really want to encourage you to apply. We have money until March 31st. After that, we don't know. But while we have it now, we want to see that the money is spent as wisely as possible. All right, thank you. If there's a question, I can answer it now, but otherwise, I'll hand you back to Nick, who'll carry on with this webinar. All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Guy. All right, so on to the reason we're all here today, which is learning a bit more about live streaming. We'll start with the basics. So obviously with live performance is canceled or at least greatly reduced. Since COVID-19 began, more and more artists have really begun exploring live streaming as an option, both as a way of being able to continue performing, and also as a source of income to be able to offset lost revenue. Obviously, the most obvious applications for this are for sort of performance-based art, concerts, theatrical performances, readings. But it is also an option for media playback, so things like film screenings or album launches, or else just creative ways of presenting writing and visual art, which I'll discuss a bit more in a moment. But first, I would say if you're interested in live streaming and you're just getting started, the main question to ask yourself right off the bat is, does it need to be live? It's really easy to get caught up in the excitement and kind of the hype around something new, but I would say don't do it for no reason. First off, you might want to consider, what are your options for reaching more people? Would it be better to do it live or something, say, pre-recorded? It is worth keeping in mind that people obviously have busy schedules. You're competing for attention with all kinds of other events. So you do want to sort of be strategic and not choose just to do it live for the heck of it. Also, I mean, in terms of advantages, it's not the same, obviously, but it can convey the feeling of a concert or a performance, which I know a lot of us are missing. So that's a real draw. Beyond that, it's also a great way of connecting with your audience. And in fact, it can be even more personal and sort of behind the scenes than a conventional performance would be if you choose to do that. On the other hand, it is, as I say, live for better or worse. If you're just getting started, there might be some sort of hiccups and technical difficulties, and you have to sort of assess your comfort level with your willingness to let those play out live in front of other people. There is, of course, a learning curve associated with the platforms you use, the apps, and the equipment. There may, in fact, be costs associated with investing in new equipment, depending on what you already have at your disposal. And if you're a solo artist, of course, it is all up to you. You have to make sure you're comfortable with doing the amount of work that is required yourself to be able to present a stream in the way you've chosen to do so. This is not in any way to discourage you from doing this. It's really just to make sure you have a full picture of some of the considerations about what live streaming entails. Another note of caution, live streaming is really not a direct replacement for the live experience. And in fact, trying to emulate that might end up being disappointing to both you and your audience. So instead, I really encourage you to try to get creative with this. Use it as an opportunity to try a new approach and something sort of specific to the context that you're working in. It really is an opportunity for greater audience engagement, although you should make sure that you engage in a way that works for you. because of course providing more access to yourself for your audience can be taxing. As far as how you might want to approach this based on your discipline, as I mentioned, for the performing arts, this is sort of the most straightforward application, although you do still want to find a way to adapt your work to the format. Obviously, for practices that involve movement, you're limited by the amount of room and your availability to convey that sense of space in a live stream. For people who are doing literature or poetry, you could take the approach of doing something like a reading or even a Q&A with an audience. For visual arts, it's obviously, at first glance, a little bit less straightforward, but there still are plenty of options if you want to explore this. So for instance, you can do a studio visit where you invite people into the place where you work, remotely of course, and talk a little bit more about your practice. You could do a gallery tour where you present work on screen and then provide some background and context about the work with your microphone. There's really a lot of possibilities, and it all boils down to how sort of creative and comfortable you are with the process. Of course, across all disciplines, you can also consider to offer classes online. And in fact, I know some in attendance today are already doing that. Of course, this presents a host of other considerations, which I'm not really going to get into specifically today. But all that to say is that, you know, that is a really interesting option if you choose to pursue that. But the main question that you're going to find yourself posing to yourself as you're getting started is which platform do you want to choose to get things underway? So which platform you choose really depends on a number of different factors that I'm going to outline. So first of all, there's ease of use. None of the platforms that I'm going to tell you about today are overly complicated, although some are certainly more approachable than others. You have to ask yourself, how many advanced features do you need, and what kind of learning curve are you comfortable with before getting started? Also an issue, reliability and stability. All of the platforms that I'm going to suggest are more or less fine in this regard, but of course, larger platforms do have more resources at their disposal in terms of being able to ensure their stability and to deal with any glitches or issues that might come up. Another big consideration is integration with your social media accounts and your existing audience. So if you have an active following on social media, ideally what you want is to use that to your advantage in such a way that it doesn't really require a lot of extra work redirecting your followers to another platform that requires a whole lot of extra work on your part. Also worth considering, of course, is the ease of monetizing your content. Some of the services I'm going to tell you about allow you to make money through ad-based programs, although these all have their own eligibility criteria that, quite frankly, are not always so easy to access, either for people who are just starting out or for people with sort of a more limited audience. So there are alternative means of getting around that, and I'll discuss those in greater detail later on. One more thing you're going to want to consider is your intended audience and the built-in community of a platform. So is it easy for people who might be interested in your work to discover it if they're browsing the platform? Is it appropriate or of interest to the average user on that platform? And does that platform sort of present the user experience that you want your audience to have? So for example, a platform like Twitch, which I'll talk more about in a second, is a really great and flexible platform, but the bulk of its use is for video game streaming. If you're going for a more professional context, that's maybe not the sort of experience you want to provide to your audience. You might want to choose something a little more neutral or discipline specific. So considerations such as that. But with those questions in mind, I'll now outline some of the main platforms that I've identified, which I've sort of put into a few different categories. The first of which are what I'm calling video conferencing apps. So these include Zoom and Google Hangouts. Obviously, you're all familiar with Zoom at least a little bit because you're all here today. Google Hangouts, for those who haven't used it, is quite similar, although I would say it's more geared towards simplicity and casual use compared to Zoom, which maybe has more of sort of a business or workplace kind of vibe to it. Whereas the other platforms that I'm going to talk about today are mostly one way, where you would present to an audience and then the audience either sort of views the performance or they can chat amongst themselves. Something like Zoom or Google Hangouts will give you a two-way kind of experience where you can have an exchange with your viewers, although that's definitely not mandatory. The other main advantage of these platforms is that people are increasingly familiar and comfortable with them. We're all using them kind of a lot these days. So whereas 6 months ago, getting a bunch of people to watch a concert on Zoom would have been perhaps next to impossible, now it's quite common, in fact. The flip side of this, of course, is a phenomenon you may already be familiar with. You may already be experiencing it today, and that is Zoom fatigue. We're leaning on these platforms a lot. Many people associate them with work. So the idea of signing back in at the end of the workday to watch a performance might not be appealing to everyone, frankly. And the other main drawbacks of these platforms, first, there's a limited amount of time for a call with more than 2 viewers on a free account. And also there are no built-in monetization options. So you would have to set up your own payment method on the side. The next category of platforms we're going to look at are what I'm calling streaming specific platforms, which includes most notably YouTube Live and Twitch. So YouTube, you may already know, it's a very popular video streaming platform, which has added this very useful live streaming component. Twitch, maybe you're less familiar with. It's owned by Amazon. It started primarily as a streaming service for video games. But based on its increased profile, really great feature set, and just overall level of quality, it's become a viable platform for all kinds of events. There's some things on there such as concerts, talk shows, movie watch-alongs. The sky is really the limit. It's super flexible. Both of these platforms work well on either a mobile device or a computer. Both of them also give you quite a lot of flexibility in terms of how you want to present your stream, at the cost of maybe a bit more complexity than just sort of starting a Zoom call and sending out a link to that call via email. I'd say that YouTube is probably the more straightforward of the two platforms, although Twitch is certainly not a great deal more complex. The main appeal of something like YouTube, I would say, is in particular its brand recognition. Twitch is increasingly well known, but probably doesn't have the same degree of profile with your average user that YouTube would. Both of these platforms do offer built-in monetization, but quite frankly, these features just really aren't all that accessible to all members. And in fact, they're quite difficult to access if you're just starting out. So there are eligibility requirements regarding the amount of viewers and subscribers you need to have. For example, for Twitch, you need at least 500 total minutes in broadcast time in the last 30 days. You need at least 7 unique broadcast days within the last 30 days. You need an average of 3 concurrent viewers or more over the last 30 days, and you need at least 50 followers. For YouTube, it's even more difficult. You need more than 4,000 public watch hours in the last 12 months, and you need more than 1,000 subscribers. So obviously for anyone who's just getting started or has a more limited following, you'll probably want to look into other approaches for monetization, and I'll give you some tips on that a little later on. But overall, that aside, these are both really great options if you need advanced features while still being fairly approachable. But if you are just starting out, the learning curve might not be to your preference. On the other hand, the next category of platform, social media platforms, their streaming services do provide a lot more ease of use as well as a range of other advantages. So these include Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, most notably. And if you're looking to stream from a phone or a tablet, I would say these are a particularly great option. In fact, streaming to Instagram or Twitter from your computer requires extra software. They really are just primarily geared towards mobile use. And so the advantages of these platforms are really twofold. First, as I mentioned, is ease of use, particularly on a mobile device. But second, and most significantly, I would say, is really having direct access to your followers on that social media platform without having to sort of post links to an external platform or do a whole bunch of other work to bring your live stream to their attention. So it's all integrated. If you put the work into growing your followers, then you've really got your potential audience ready to go. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on how much you use one of these platforms. They all do offer built-in monetization, but much like YouTube and Twitch, these monetization services are really difficult to access. They're more reserved for more high-profile users. Although I will add that Facebook has recently announced plans to let users charge for access to their live streams, which is a really great and useful initiative. I haven't seen any specifics as to this since sort of the first details were announced. I am keeping an eye on this, and as soon as there is some information to share, I will definitely bring it to your attention. There's another program that is available through SOCAN to help musicians earn revenue from performances. So I'll tell you more about that a little later on in the presentation. The last category of platforms that I want to look at are maybe a little bit more niche. They don't have as large of a user base, but there is still some appeal there. And these are discipline-specific platforms. So 3 in particular that I've identified. First, there's one called HowlRound. This is a platform intended for theater, be that performances, talks, workshops, what have you. And the interesting thing about this platform is that it is curated. So you need to submit your project for approval. You can't just sort of, hit the stream button and get going right away. So this is a hurdle to access that you won't find anywhere else among the platforms that I've identified. But that level of curation and quality control may appeal to you if you're looking to bring your work to HowlRound's existing community. The next platform is for live music, and it's called StageIt. This one has been around for a little bit already, with sort of more limited popularity and use, although there are some significant musicians and recording artists associated with it. And this functions according to a ticket-based income model. So basically functions similar to a normal performance. A user will buy a ticket, they'll get a link to the stream, and then they can attend. The last discipline-specific platform is also for live music, but functions a little bit differently. It's called Street Jelly, and it functions according to what they call a busking model. So basically, it's a built-in tipping system. You can attend any stream free of charge, but then you're encouraged to tip the performer during the performance. This also has sort of a more limited user base compared to other platforms. But depending on if you're working in music and you like that kind of tip-based approach, that could be something really interesting to look into. So this is basically all the platforms, the main platforms that I've identified, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, obviously. Presented with all of these, you may be asking yourself, why can't I maybe stream to multiple platforms at the same time? You definitely can do this. In fact, there are a couple of services that will help you do that. First, there's one called restream.io, which you're able to do using a free account. But if you want to stream to a Facebook page rather than just your personal profile, you will have to get a paid account. The next service is one called StreamYard, which is a really useful platform for a bunch of reasons in and of itself. I'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later. But if you want to use its services streaming to multiple platforms, it will require a paid account. One thing to note, having access to more potential viewers might seem like a big advantage, but obviously it does come with its drawbacks. So technically it's a more complicated process. It requires a computer rather than just simply streaming from your mobile device. It requires a bit more work, and frankly, there's a greater chance for something to go wrong, sort of the more levels of technical complexity that you introduce into the process. Also, managing your presence on multiple platforms. If you're streaming to multiple social media platforms, your audience on each one of those will only be as large or as engaged as you have put the time into making it. And also, if you want to engage with your audience during your performance, whether that's sort of directly through video or in the chat, or if you want to just have the community chat amongst themselves, having them split across multiple platforms is a disadvantage. So with that being said, now that you have an idea of where you can stream, how about how to actually do it? So some things to keep in mind as you get started. You may be comfortable with live streaming from your phone or tablet, sort of using your chosen platform for a more casual way of engaging with your audience. That's totally fine. But if you're looking to present something more professional, you'll probably need some extra equipment to ensure a high enough level of quality. So there's really two questions you want to be asking yourself here. First, how do you want to represent yourself in your stream? And also, it's a question of standing out from other streams being offered, you know, because there is a lot of other content available. So higher production value will not only make people feel like it's worth watching, but may also make them feel like it's more worth it to pay to watch. Of course, you'll need to decide how you want to stream. Are you going to use a computer, or do you prefer to use a mobile device like a phone or a tablet? Equipment is available for both, so that's not an issue. Although a computer will give you more flexibility and more choice in what you can use. And you will want to be clear when you set a budget. So there are plenty of affordable options, but you really should determine how much you're willing to spend and what your needs and priorities are before you get started. One big consideration going into this is internet speed and reliability. So if you're using a computer, I do suggest that a wired connection is probably better than Wi-Fi for stability. I myself have like a 30-foot Ethernet cable draped across my apartment right now. It's kind of an extreme measure that might not be necessary in all instances, depending on how your space is set up. But some kind of a wired connection is probably preferable. And obviously, I do know that the internet can be an issue for some of our colleagues in the regions, and particularly more remote regions. This is something I'm aware of, and there really does need to be some way of addressing this moving forward. I'm trying to look into what resources are available to mitigate these issues. But all that to say is it's on my radar, and any resources I do come across, I will be trying to share as widely as possible. Next, depending on your practice, you may decide that either audio or video quality will take precedence, or you may decide that both are of equal importance to your stream. In terms of audio quality, whether it's for music or performance with a voice, you'll want to ensure that you have high quality microphones. If your work requires movement, this may necessitate wireless microphones, which can frankly be a bit more costly for high quality models. The advantage, of course, is both sound quality and reliability. So if you're using sort of a consumer grade wireless microphone using Bluetooth, that can be susceptible to dropouts, which are super frustrating and obviously not ideal. For a traditional microphone, that will require some sort of recording interface for your computer or your mobile device in order to convert the signal. These are also useful if you want to record multiple sound sources at once, whether that's multiple microphones, instruments, you name it. And how many inputs you need will partly determine what interface you want to choose. Most of the more advanced interfaces are available for Mac and PC only, but there are increasingly a lot of good quality options available for mobile devices as well, or that function on both mobile and computer. And due to the growing popularity of podcasting and live streaming, there is a growing and significant selection of quality microphones that you can plug directly into your computer or your mobile device via USB or some other connection. Although it's worth noting that you'll usually be limited to just one microphone at a time if you do that. For video, you'll want to determine whether you need to upgrade to a higher quality webcam than the one that is included in your computer, if in fact one is included in your computer. If you're looking to get a new webcam, it's worth noting that due to COVID-19 and quarantine, many webcam models are in quite short supply. People have sort of been scrambling to get their own. So you may have to look around or wait for the model that you're interested in to come back in stock. If you want an even more significant upgrade on image quality, you can also use a standalone camera with a capture card connected to your computer. This is particularly useful if you already have a nice enough camera that takes videos and that outputs that image over an HDMI cable, or if you're willing to upgrade to such a camera. And there are, of course, a wide range of capture cards available in both consumer and professional categories, depending on your needs. These either connect to a computer via a cable like USB or Thunderbolt, or they could plug directly into a desktop computer. Regarding your camera, of course, camera is not just the only factor in determining image quality. You'll also need to pay attention to the lighting in your space to ensure optimal quality. Depending on your space, the space you're working in and the nature of your work, you may also want to consider multiple cameras, which will of course necessitate not just additional equipment, but also probably more people working on your stream, both to operate the cameras and to sort of edit the video accordingly. So this is obviously far from comprehensive or detailed, but it is sort of an introductory overview into the kinds of equipment you're going to need. I didn't want to overwhelm everybody with too much information, but I am certainly available for more specific suggestions if you have a particular technical need in mind. Hopefully it's a useful introduction for some of you who are just thinking about this sort of thing for the first time. But really there's such a wide range of equipment available that you can absolutely find the right setup that fits your needs and your comfort level in terms of budget, quality, and technical requirements. Before moving on from the technical aspect of things, I want to highlight just a couple of apps that are useful if you're using a computer rather than a mobile device for streaming. First of those is StreamYard, which I already mentioned earlier. StreamYard, beyond its utility to stream to multiple platforms, it's really useful just as a high quality streaming app that runs right out of your browser and gives you a lot of useful options in how you want to present your work. And despite its range of features and how much it does, it's really quite user-friendly and super approachable. The second piece of software has a bit more of a learning curve. It's called OBS, or Open Broadcaster Software. It's really powerful, really widely used. As I said, more of a learning curve, but not so bad. There's a lot of tutorials and how-tos that are available. This you download directly to your computer. You can stream to a wide variety of platforms. Also worth noting that it gives you a lot of flexibility and options in terms of image and audio mixing, which depending on sort of the sophistication of the stream you're trying to present might be very useful to you. So while streaming can be straightforward with a bit of practice and the right technical know-how and equipment, monetization can be a bit trickier, as many of you may have already found. So while some of the services I outlined obviously do offer that built-in monetization where you can automatically earn money from people watching your streams, eligibility criteria means it's really just not accessible. It's only fairly established and popular channels that can take advantage of that. So if you're just getting started, your best bet would probably be to set up your own payment option. If you do want to try using those built-in monetization features of those platforms, I try to suggest you focus on just one or at most two of those platforms. Partly you want to focus to build your audience, and partly it's just because the rules and criteria can be so convoluted that you probably just want to focus on one or two to make sure that you're really able to check all the boxes to make sure that you are eligible for those monetization services. That being said, since built-in monetization is really not an option for most of us, I am going to outline now a few services that can provide a viable alternative. A quick note before I do, it is important going into this to manage your expectations. Realistically, you probably won't be able to completely offset your performance revenues, at least right away. And it will, of course, take some time to make the most of the experience. But it definitely is worth getting started if you're interested in doing so. So as far as the monetization services that I have identified, the first amongst those you may already know is PayPal. So PayPal is a wallet type service, fairly commonly used for online shopping and sending personal payments. Connects to your credit card or your bank account. Fees are charged per transaction, but you can make withdrawals to your bank account without any additional fees. There's just sort of a brief processing period depending on your financial institution. The big advantage with PayPal is that it's really flexible. You can decide how you want to integrate that into your process. So for example, if you're encouraging donations during your stream, rather than using a platform that has built-in donations, you can simply share a link in your event description that'll allow viewers to send you a payment, provided that they themselves have a PayPal account. Of course, that does mean in that case that payment is voluntary, which depending on your situation is not ideal. The next service is called Eventbrite, and this is more sort of what I call a ticket-based service. It really replicates a conventional experience of buying a ticket for a single event. So somebody would see your event listed, they would purchase a ticket, and then they'd then receive they would receive a link to the stream before the stream itself. It's a very professional and widely used service. Depending on what kind of account you have, they offer different features to you, and they sort of charge you with a different percentage of your ticket revenue, plus a flat rate of either 59 or 99 cents per ticket. The downside to something like Eventbrite is not dissimilar from a traditional experience, whereas rather than having a recurring viewership, you really have to work to draw an audience each time, which may or may not be easy or straightforward for you. So people can follow your account on Eventbrite if they're really invested in the platform, but it's not really sort of a social media type platform. The majority of users are probably not going to do that. They're going to attend your event, and then they might not necessarily find out about the next one. So something to keep in mind. The last service that I'm going to highlight is a particularly interesting one, and it's called Patreon. For those of you who are not aware of it, Patreon is a subscription type service. So it allows people to subscribe to your work on a recurring basis. It's an increasingly popular platform for all kinds of content, be it podcasting, writing, different visual media, you name it. It offers 3 different tiers of user accounts, which charge a different percentage based on your monthly revenue. Each of those accounts has its own features and perks that comes with it. They also charge a small processing fee per subscription. I do want to note that it's also a really good service for sharing non-live works. So be it visual art, writing, or recorded media, super useful. You can also use it to share links to private live streams or Zoom calls with your subscribers. For example, I know of one visual artist who offers Zoom-based studio visits to their Patreon subscribers every month. An interesting feature is that you can set pay tiers. So different monthly amounts, each with its own range of privileges to your subscribers. So someone who subscribes at a higher tier for a bit more money may, say, get access to more frequent content or more different kinds of content. How you set that up is really flexible and up to you. What works best amongst these different features, or these different services rather? Obviously, I would say work with what you feel most comfortable with. That being said, I do really strongly suggest you consider the Patreon model if you haven't already. In my research on live streams and sort of people shifting their work online, audience engagement is really crucial. And you're better off trying to build and sustain that core loyal following on a recurring basis rather than having to sell single events and kind of work to bring people back each time. However, as always, know your audience. You'll want to determine what their comfort level with these services might be. Ask yourself if you maybe want to err on the side of simplicity and a more traditional approach. Say, for example, if you're trying to bring sort of your existing audience online and they're a bit more sort of comfortable with that ticket-based process, maybe to facilitate their transition into an online viewership, you want to sort of mirror that as closely as possible. But even beyond these monetization services and helping you earn revenue, there are a couple of notable funding sources that are available to you for live streaming. So first among those I mentioned briefly earlier, it's called the SOCAN Encore program. This was announced in May in response to COVID-19. So in partnership with Facebook, SOCAN is offering $150 per musical performance for any live events that were streamed on either Facebook or Instagram between March 15th of this year and March 7th of 2021. As far as eligibility criteria, you do need at least 10 songs or compositions to be performed, or a performance of at least 30 minutes. You need to have had at least 100 people in attendance for this live event. You do need to send in your set list via SOCAN's submission form. You just need to highlight the venue on the form as either Facebook or Instagram. And you must make your claim within 90 days of the concert occurring. So this is a really great initiative. I really do hope we see more like this in the future. As far as I know, it is the only kind of funding of its kind right now. And obviously the main drawback is that it's only available to musicians. As far as a more widely available program, there was one just announced by CALQ earlier this month called Exploration et Déploiement Numérique, Exploration and Digital Deployment Program. So this is available to individual artists or organizations across all disciplines. And the goal of this program is really to increase the amount of Quebec's artistic content that has been put online, enhance its discoverability, and support the adoption of new digital approaches by artists and organizations. It offers funding up to $100,000 per project. Eligible expenses amongst that $100,000 include artist remuneration, research and promotion costs, and acquisition or rental costs for digital equipment, which is really interesting and worth looking into. It's open to applications now, and I really do want to emphasize what a great and timely resource this is, and really encourage you to take advantage of it. In fact, we here at ELAN and Quebec Relations are so enthusiastic about getting you to take advantage of this program, we want to help you apply for it. So for any organizations that are applying, we can refer you to our grant writing consultant at no cost, who can either help you prepare a strong application from scratch, or if you're a little more experienced, they can provide some editing to make sure your application really shines. For any individual artists who are interested in the Exploration and Digital Deployment Program, we're able to offer this same service to you under exceptional circumstances, really because this is such a great and much needed opportunity to help jumpstart your work in the midst of this pandemic. So if you're interested in finding out more about this, all it takes is sending me an email so we can discuss your needs and I can refer you. And I'll have my email address up on the screen at the end of the presentation for you to take note. As far as additional resources that we can offer through Quebec Relations, obviously funding is not just important in the short term, it's also crucial to think about sustaining your work in the long term, and applying for grants can really help you do that. As far as what applying for funding actually entails, it's really a two-part process. First, it's a matter of identifying the programs that are of interest to you. So that means understanding their criteria, understanding the kind of programs that, the kind of projects that those programs are looking for. And second, of course, is actually preparing a successful application. So for arts organizations who are pursuing provincial funding, whether that's from CALQ, SODEC, the Ministry of Culture, or any other ministry or funding body at the provincial level, we can make both of those steps a little more painless for you. So one thing our surveys show is that regardless of people's experience level, researching these grants is an issue. It could be due to lack of experience, not knowing where to start, maybe feeling a bit intimidated by the process, which is perfectly understandable. But it could also be an issue for more experienced grant writers, just because your day-to-day activities keep you so busy that you just don't have the time to look into what other funding is out there beyond what you already know. So through our individual consultations, I'm able to do a bit of the research for you. We can set up a Zoom or phone call so I can learn a bit about your organization, what your funding needs are, and what your funding needs are moving forward. And then I can get back to you with a list of relevant programs, which we can then discuss and refine based on your feedback. Obviously, just identifying those grants is only half the battle. So whether you're a first-time applicant and you're not sure where to start, or you're a more experienced grant writer and you just need a bit of help polishing your application, we can provide you with subsidized grant writing and editing assistance to really make sure you put your best foot forward. So whether you decide you need some help after one of these individual consultations, or maybe you know straight away you have some programs that you want to apply for, all you have to do is reach out to me and we can get that process underway of referring you for assistance. Obviously, as Guy mentioned, we know that these are really useful resources for organizations, and we know that individual artists need this kind of support as well. For individuals, we really are working to be able to provide these resources, both in the short term, in the form of sort of resources and tip sheets as far as useful starting points of where to look when you're just getting started looking for grants. In the long term, obviously we do have a proposal we need to plan for the next phase of the Quebec Relations project starting in 2021, which will hopefully provide more assistance to individual artists. But in the meantime, although we're not able to offer this subsidized grant writing service across the board, if you're interested in some assistance, we can refer you to qualified grant writers with reasonable rates. I'm also available to chat and offer you some suggestions for funders or programs worth looking at if you're just getting started. But really, to reiterate, in the short term, if you're an individual artist and you're interested in free grant writing assistance for the CALQ Exploration and Digital Deployment Program that we just discussed, please do get in touch, because this is one where we're absolutely able to help you, and we're more than happy to do so. And of course, beyond that, any input you want to share regarding your needs as an individual artist when it comes to identifying and accessing funding can give us a much better idea of the kinds of resources and services that we should be offering in the future. So please do get in touch. So I know that was a lot of information, but that brings us to the end of the presentation.